Hello and welcome to the Garden of the Black Roses. This is the next chapter of The Adventures of Iron Wolves, Book 1, Alpha. Chapter 4, Fight or Flight. Styx leapt and came crashing down towards the dwarf's feet first. He stood on the shoulders of the tallest dwarf and crouched, bringing his daggers around and through its neck. Mariel darted out and began slicing short, quick, and furious strikes against a dwarf carrying a long sword with a curved blade. Styx leapt up to hover, momentarily watching her in amusement. She truly is Anima's teacher in swordsmanship. Her style is the exact same as Anima's. He flew back down and struck the remaining two dwarves with his feet to send them sprawling over their already dead buddy. Hearing a thump, then a squelch behind him, he flew backwards and landed lightly next to Mariel. Mariel held the dwarf's hand in hers. Heart in her hand. Its blood dripped through her fingers and onto the dead body it came from. Styx recoiled slightly at this. Definitely Anima's teacher. Their similarities are scary. The remaining two dwarves advanced upon them, their eyes not looking at the heart Mariel held in her hand. The sight had unnerved them. Styx could tell that his blood-stained jacket was affecting them as well. "You really want to mess with me?" she asked them, squeezing the heart until it fell to pieces onto the dead body. A silver bracelet sending silver light over the blood covering her hand. "I can do worse to you, and you won't necessarily be dead when I start." The two dwarfs took one look at her and ran. Styx took back the dagger and handed her his bow. "I hope you're as good a shot with a bow," he said, taking a hold of her around the waist and flew out of the dungeon to hover at the bottom of the deep spiral ramp pit. "As we fly up, we're going to be very vulnerable to airborne objects they throw at us." Mariel tested the bowstring and then reached into the quiver hanging from his right hip for an arrow. "I'm a master of all weapons," she told him quietly. "Anima chose me, Miyako, and Chie as her personal bodyguards because of our skills in weaponry or our ability to protect her if she was unable to protect herself." She pulled the bow taut, with an arrow nocked and ready. Styx smiled. "Nice to know," he said, and flapped his wings hard once, and they shot upwards through the pit. Mariel's eyes scanned the ramps for danger. Something tugged again. He looked at Mariel, who shook her head. Another imprisoned elf? Hours earlier, Anima asked Rue if they could rest for the night before heading back to Lunarias in the morning. She could see he was tired from flying such a long distance in one day. "Besides," she added, sitting on a large branch, her back against the trunk of the tree they had landed in, "I don't want to risk you falling out of the sky from tiredness." Rue gave her a withering look before floating down to one of the lower branches to find his own branch to rest on. He was still searching when a shriek sounded above him. "Roo!" Something blue fell past him fast. His eyes widened and released the air in his wings, allowing gravity to speed his descent. His speed wasn't fast enough. Anima hit the ground with a sickening crunch. Blood pooled quickly from the side of her head. Rue landed hard into a crouch and turned her over. Despite the seriousness of her injuries, he breathed a sigh of relief. Her head, the skin was torn and bleeding, but wasn't dented. He felt certain her skull wasn't broken. His eyes briefly fell onto the stone cuffs binding her wrists. She'll survive with just those cuts, Rue thought, beginning to tear his shirt. Those were his last thoughts before something hard and metallic smacked into the back of his head. "It's Anima," she said, touching her chest. He could only just see the crescent moon insignia tattooed just over her left breast. "She's calling me. I didn't know you could feel her calling as well." Stykes stopped and hovered, listening to the sounds above them. "Normally I can't," he said, noticing a few ash-colored feathers falling nearby. Looking up, he saw a ball of ash feathers laced with red falling past them. "Can you hold on to me? I'm going to slow Rue's descent." Mariel nodded and held on as tightly as she could. Stykes dived downwards again, his hand outstretched to grab a hold of Rue's bloody hand. "Rue!" Rue looked up in a daze when he jerked as Stykes caught his wrist. "Stykes," he said weakly, "Anima's..." Stykes continued to descend until they stood at the bottom of the pit once again. Rue's breathing rattled loudly in his chest as he struggled to speak. The statuette Anima took was a trap. It bound her wrists and ankles together as soon as she opened it. The Dark Dwarves want to hold her for ransom. "Where is she now?" Stykes and Mariel asked at the same time. They looked at each other warily, knowing the battle ahead would be bloody. Stykes focused his power into Rue, slowly healing what he could. "Was she hurt?" he asked quietly. "She's hurt," Rue replied. "She fell out of the tree we were resting in." He sat up and worked his joints to test his strength. "She's going to be brought down here to the Grand Hall. We just need to wait." Anima opened her eyes, her vision red and blurred. "Where?" she asked thickly, as she found she had bit her tongue when she had fallen. She could feel blood draining freely down the right side of her face. Someone roughly sat her up, causing her to wince in pain. "You're in the Rune's headquarters," a voice spoke in her ear. A blade traced lightly over the bare skin of her legs. "You're our bargaining chip with King Nephlite. Our mining of Hinor is dwindling, and we need money, or mages, to revive the mountain." A pair of hands roughly picked her up and threw her onto a carpeted piece of floor. The back of her head fell hard against a metallic surface. She lost consciousness once more, not knowing the three she wished for were in the room. Styx, Rue, and Mariel stood at the entrance to the grand hall. Styx flicked his daggers around so the blades faced back to his wrists. Rue held his broadsword in front of him, fire dancing over the blade. Mariel had removed Styx's quiver and attached it to her own belt, nocked a new arrow, and stood between the boys. Before them stood over 40 dark dwarves, all armed and ready. Behind those dwarves, Anima laid on the carpeted dais, near a large metallic throne. Upon the throne sat Tolkien, the leader of the runes. The three nodded to each other, knowing if one reached Tolkien, they could end this quicker than killing all of the dwarves, and leapt into battle. Far from the battle, Anima awoke to the sound of fighting. Opening her eyes, she tried to look through the dark red haze in her vision. A hand pulled her up by her shirt. She could feel his breath on her face as he spoke. "You're awake again. I didn't know you had such resources at your hands. You have a full elf, a part elf, and a part angel trying to rescue you. They aren't doing too well, though." Mariel, Styx, and Rue, Anima thought dimly, her head swimming in a clumsy attempt to keep consciousness. "Father won't answer to your demands. He's dealt with ransom before. He knows that those who use ransom as a means to get what they want use ransom again and again until either he stops folding or they run out of things they want." Her skin grew cold as the voice laughed cruelly. She could feel the person holding her stand, pulling her up with him. Her feet hovered just above the carpet, letting her know he was very tall for a dwarf. A blade pressed against her neck, and a voice whispered in her ear, "Thanks for the idea. You don't have to be alive when we deliver you to him." His voice grew louder, causing all the fighting to be silenced. "Styx, hold your pointless fighting." He pressed the blade harder against Anima's throat. A flutter of wings, and Anima could sense Styx had landed in front of them. "You're seriously stupid, old man." Anima clenched her teeth at his statement. Sweat rolled down her forehead. "What makes you believe that I care whether she lives or not? I'm the Guildmaster of the Iron Wolves. I'm only here because King Nephlite asked for aid from my guild to rescue his sorry daughter." Tolkien felt Anima's body tensed and smiled. Then he moved the dagger slightly, cutting deeply into her neck. Blood trickled down her chest and staining her white shirt. "Just like me, you don't care if she's alive when you deliver her to Nephlite. But what about the other two? They are retainers to the royal family of Lunarias. I'm sure they won't be as uncaring. I bet if you want to get paid for this job, you'd have to retrieve her alive with glowing reports from them." He gave Anima a little shake and then smiled. "What's wrong, little princess?" Styx looked at Anima's face. Tears streamed from her eyes. Blood drained freely down her face from several cuts along the hairline on her forehead. With his elven blood active, he could clearly sense a hurt feeling coming from her. He looked back at Tokan, his eyes narrowed and angry. "Is this how you want to be remembered by your clan?" Styx took a step forward, forcing Tokan to step back. "A coward?" Tokan's eyes darkened angrily, the blade on Anima's neck moving, creating a longer, deeper cut. A loud, squelching sound interrupted them, and they turned to stare at Mariel. "I'm sorry," she said, holding 4 hearts in her hand and squeezing them until they were just red pieces of pulp lying on the ground. "I had a sudden craving for blood." Styx smiled and turned back to Tokan, who now looked very pale. "We're all actually quite bloodthirsty." Tokan dropped Anima and backed away from Styx, his eyes wide with fear. Anima felt Styx move forward and kneel near her head. His cold hand gently touched her forehead. He stood again, spinning his daggers in his hands until the blades faced away from his wrists. Sounds of fighting picked up again, with the occasional squelching sound. Anima laid on her side, her mind crudely holding on to consciousness. She wasn't sure how much time had passed, but when the fighting died down, she prayed to the dove goddess of luck that her friends were still alive. Strong arms picked her up and cradled her gently. Smaller hands, she knew were Mariel's, cut the stone bonds away from her wrists and ankles. "Mariel?" Anima asked, reaching out a hand. The smaller hands enclosed her hand and drew it to her chest. "Mariel, She couldn't say it. As far as she could tell, the one holding her was Rue. She didn't want Styx to know what she wanted to say. "I can feel it," Mariel said quietly, still holding Anima's hand to her chest tightly. "I'm a full elf, remember? I can sense your emotions clearly, whether you want me to know them or not." She paused and then added, "Styx can feel them too." A cold hand touched her forehead again, and then took her from Rue to carry her gently in his arms. The one holding her now stood and, she guessed, Mariel and the one who was holding her before stood as well. "Let's get out of here." Styx's voice sounded very close and loud. "I don't want the guild attacking us when they find out Tokan is dead." The sound of wings and the 4 were airborne again, making their way down the hall and to the spiral ramp pit. Anima felt warm against Styx's chest and held on tightly. "I wanted him to let you go," Styx murmured to her. "I didn't want to hurt you in the process." Anima didn't reply. She felt him move slightly, to fly down another hall, and upwards again to the gate, and out into the sun. After a while in the sun, she said, Of course it would hurt. Sometimes I always wonder about is what I am to you. Hearing something like that makes me feel like you see me as less than an ally. Convenient asset until I'm unneeded. You're not like that to me, he said softly, looking back to make sure Rue and Mario were still following behind him. He took a deep breath and paused, and released it slowly. Anima could feel wet drops falling onto her cheeks, and wondered if it had begun raining. The thought of Styx crying seemed surreal to her. I almost lost you twice this past month. How many more times do I need to come rescue you before you realize you're too important for me to just throw away like yesterday's rubbish? Anima raised her hand upwards to slowly touch his cheek. Are you crying? She asked, causing him to stop flying and just float in the air. Rue and Mario slowed and stopped near Styx. His cheeks felt wet under her hand. What's wrong? Rue asked, realizing Styx was crying. Mario reached out and waved her hand in front of Anima's face. Anima didn't respond to Mario's hand, or even notice the two were next to them again. Anima, Styx swallowed. Styx swallowed hard, then forced his voice to be calm. Can you see me? Anima shook her head and withdrew her hand to let it rest on her chest. For how long? Since they hit me, Anima replied quietly. She wondered if Styx was trying to avoid her answering her question. All I see is a haze of red. Like blood, I guess. She gripped onto Styx hard as he took off fast towards Lunarias. Rue and Mario followed close behind. He wasn't avoiding, she thought in amazement. He's worried about me. Comforted by this thought, she closed her eyes and fell asleep. Anima awoke to the feeling of fresh, clean sheets. Her head felt heavy from the bandages that were wrapped around her head and neck. On her right, she could feel two people. One held her hand tightly in their hands and pressed against their forehead. The other laid with their head resting on her leg. The haze of red still dominated her vision. She waited for a while before wondering who was there with her. She started with the one holding her hand. Large hands told her it definitely was not Mario. She sat up, feeling the one on her leg move, possibly sitting up as well. She moved her left hand to touch the person's head. Male? I think maybe taller than me, so not father. The person lifted his head but didn't speak. She moved her hand slowly over his face, then down to his shoulder. She felt skin where sleeves normally would be. Styx watched her expression change from curiosity to confusion. He waited, letting her lean closer to run a hand over the top of his back. He could feel her fingers slipping between the slits on his back. Styx? Anima asked uncertainly. He didn't reply, his smile growing every second. She brought her head down close to his, until her lips were near his left ear. "If you don't answer me, I'll bite." "You should be more confident," he said softly, his voice unable to hide the fact that he had a huge smile on his face. "You touched my face. You felt the missing sleeves on my jacket, and even the slits on my back. There's no one else you know who would wear a jacket like that." "Stop teasing her," Mariel's voice said with a snap. Anima guessed by the distance of her voice that Mariel was the one who was resting on her legs earlier. She's still not able to see. Even you would know that if you left your elven blood active. Her voice softened and added, "You've been out for almost a week. We were beginning to worry whether you were going to wake up at all or not." Anima opened her mouth before shutting it again. "A week?" Styx took the opportunity to reply to Mariel instead, realizing Anima wasn't going to. "And broadcast everyone that I'm a half-elf?" Styx asked, slightly annoyed. "I would rather keep that secret for as long as possible." Feeling Anima's hand touch his cheek, he turned to look at her. She moved her hand away and raised her finger with a cheeky smile on her face. "Your second task," she said, causing Styx to almost fall off his chair. Not seeing this, she continued on. "I need you to rescue Miyako. She won't be able to fly. You won't be able to fly with her, as you can with Mariel because, well, she's a centaur." Styx glanced at Mariel, who nodded with confirmation. "You can either take Rue or Mariel. Whoever you don't take will stay here with me." Styx was glad she couldn't see the expression on his face. Rue broke the silence and got up from his corner. "You need to rest, milady," he said, pressing her shoulders down lightly. "The healers only healed you as much as they could without overstraining your body." Styx kissed Anima's hand before motioning to Mariel to follow him. He looked back at Rue and Anima before closing the door behind him. Styx rounded on Mariel, bristling at Anima, setting another task for him. "What the hell?" "Those who start the night challenge are meant to finish it," Mariel replied calmly. "Anima knows this, which is why she was smiling like that when she gave you your next task." Styx pressed 2 fingers to his forehead. "So where is Miyako then?" His eyes set on finishing his tasks. "Please tell me she's being held in a place where I don't need to use my elven blood." "Miyako is being forced as a bodyguard for the King of Orifice." She ignored Styx's exasperated sigh and continued. "I was the last to be captured, so you made the right choice in whom to take with you." This didn't improve Styx's mood, and Mariel let out an exasperated sigh of her own. "Miyako was captured by the king when one of his assassins snapped a red collar around her neck. Miyako is skilled in archery, and her running speed is practically unmatched." "Red collar?" Styx's eyes narrowed. "Red is the color of the keeper god of the elves." Mariel nodded and looked at him with a look that confirmed his suspicion. And the third person that Anima will send me to rescue? He's also caught with a red collar, Mario confirmed, sending chills vibrating through Stykes' body. Somebody of the royal family of elves is selling artifacts that originally were used to bind prisoners. She gave Stykes a look that he never wanted to see from her again. Never wanted to see from her. You can't avoid it anymore. It's your duty to retrieve those items and find out who it is that's selling them. And I was hoping I didn't have to return to the royal family ever again. Stykes leaned against the wall, his memories of the white walls of his youth flooding back to him. Marielle knelt before him, and he recoiled, trying to press deeper into the wall. You need to, she said softly, not lifting her head to look at him. You're the crown prince of the elves. It's your duty no matter how much you deny it. Not hearing Stykes say anything, she cautiously looked up. Stykes looked frozen, staring at something behind her. She stood and turned to see Rue standing there, his eyes wide in shock. Anima will find out eventually, she said back to Stykes with a level voice. Whether you tell her or when you marry her and she finds out that way, she will know. Stykes shook his head. I won't tell her now, he said slowly, making sure Rue understood what would happen to him if he told her. There's no threat to her just yet. She probably already has her suspicions because I carry the red scroll that only the elven royal family can carry. That's it for this chapter. Yeah, make sure to like, comment and subscribe. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you want me to write or continue on. I've already got lots of different pieces that I've either written chapters for, which you can find in playlists. Just look for the writing section. But yeah, as always, let your imagination run wild. Bye for now.